Hi, my name is Nancy Brennan. Thanks, Jen, for the nice introduction. And thank you, Cindy. I really enjoyed your talk, and you touched on a couple of things that I'm going to lead into as well. I'm just trying to share my screen. Is that working?
Not yet. If you can just remember to click on once you have the share screen button, once you select your option, just remember to click on the share button.
How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. So as Jennifer mentioned, I've been working supporting individuals, not only with PWS, but an individual, a young lady 18 years ago, 20 years ago was assigned. She was my first client. And since that time, the world of Prader-Willi syndrome has just felt like home a lot of the time. Since then, I've supported younger children, not as often, only because they develop bigger behavioral problems as they age, it seemed. I've spent a lot of time supporting adults in group homes. The talk I'm giving you tonight is about a young lady who was assigned to my caseload, excuse me, with Prader-Willi syndrome, who was fairly high functioning and very, very independent in the community. She was engaging in quite a bit of stealing, from a lot of stores, implications with the police, of course, and everything that brought to her life, in addition to accessing a lot of high calorie foods and gaining weight. So when she was assigned to me, I actually reached out to Jen and said, help, has anybody done this before? How do I help this lady implement some restrictions that'll make sense to her and keep her safe? I really didn't know how to do it, but as we moved along, we had some success. So that's what I'm going to share with you tonight. Just trying to get through. Here we go. Okay. So lying becomes, telling the truth becomes really, really aversive. Over time, every time, if food access was disclosed, or they were honest, or my experience has been anyway, when people were honest about where they were getting food, then those loopholes quickly close up, and there goes their food source, and there goes a lot of their pleasure. So telling the truth wasn't a big part of, or enjoyable. And it really decreased people's independence in that restrictions got implemented. Sometimes transportation changed, friends were switched places. Telling the truth wasn't high on anybody's priority list. When I started to think of lying as an absence of skills, then and in that the person maybe didn't have the skills necessary to tell the truth, then it took on a whole different meaning for me. We recognized that faulty responding became a pattern, and it became so well developed because to tell that as soon as they were asked a tricky question, their immediate response would be, nope, didn't take it. And they avoided punishment and negative feedback. So it became very, very effective, and over time became very, very solid. So what I aim to do is to train the person I was working with in the skills of telling the truth. Parents and caregivers are driven to protect individuals, their family members, and that totally makes sense. Keeping or preventing access to any food opportunities. Individuals that I've worked with in group homes, a lot of the staff responses were immediate. They can't do this, they can't have that, they can't go there. And that's just not real life. I think as parents, we're trying to keep them so safe that it can become easy to decrease real or potential opportunities to engage in activities around food. If the individual is given an opportunity to take something, they will. And or my experience with this individual was that way. So it became an environmental issue and not a personal issue. if there's food accessible in an environment such as a school, a daycare, a group home, a day program, then it's really not about asking the individual to not take that food. It's more about keeping the food away from the individual and by making environmental changes. So what I started to do with this young woman I was supporting was I needed to get more information on where she was stealing, how she was stealing, and eventually over time, she was able to bring me to the store she was stealing from. Yeah, I was very, very neutral. It was clear that she wasn't going to faze me with anything she was going to show me. I began to notice increases in her anxiety that I eventually termed avoidance responses. So she'd become fidgety, giggly, frequent requests to escape the environment. But anyway, back to the original point is that we went to this store. In Canada, it was known as Farm Boy. That was her favorite place. And she was able to, we walked around, we looked at the food, and she was able to show me exactly what it was she wanted. And it ended up being a cabbage roll, a salad, and some other really appropriate choice. I asked her, so how do you take this? And she just calmly let me know that she'd walk into another aisle, she'd order it, it would be boxed for her. She'd walk into another aisle, slip it down her pants, and leave. And it was that easy. Knowing that it was that easy and that reinforcing, I knew that no matter what I said or did, she wasn't going to change this behavior as long as she was getting away with it. The consequence of having the police involved, disappointing her parents, nothing was going to change that behavior. And that, what Cindy mentioned, honoring and understanding the PWS brain is just that, is that this was not something that she was going to be able to change no matter how much she wanted to change it. She knew it was not right. She knew she was getting into trouble, but it was a lot more powerful than she was able to control. We began to develop a common language which really facilitated how we communicated with each other. And then we were able to transfer it over to her parents. Difficult conversations are common, especially when it involves lost items, stolen items, or found foods. Parents, my experience was that parents, would simply approach and say, "Did you take that?" And it was quickly, could quickly lead to a, you'll see further down on the slide, the term meltdown, quickly lead to a meltdown, quickly lead to denials. And then often what I've seen is I liked what Cindy said about don't argue. You're never going to get the answer you want. Even if you have the food in your hand, a lot of it will be just, I didn't take it. And it's so convincing. So together with the family, we decided, how are we going to let this person know that we have a difficult situation that we need to discuss? So we developed a term that she was comfortable with called red zone conversations. When conversations needed to be discussed around stealing or food access, mom or dad would simply approach her and say, we need to have a red zone conversation. Is now a good time? I need to have a sticky conversation with you. Is that okay? If she said no, then that was respected, but it was to be revisited in a time that was mutually agreed upon. Some situations that were really difficult, the lady I was supporting was an athletic swimmer. She was an independent worker. She traveled the community alone. So we needed to identify what triggers and hotspots were in gyms and change rooms. Triggers and hotspots for her were lockers, other people's items. When she began working, some of her hotspots were when she traveled from the bus to her work. There was one particular pharmacy. We identified that as a hotspot. Then we had a common language that we could discuss on how we were going to manage triggers and hotspots. Also, what it allowed us to do was prepare for other difficult situations. One of our strategies was, let's identify what the triggers are going to be for this situation. So going to a party, getting an invitation, having a sleepover, planning a family trip, we'd always discuss what triggers and hotspots could potentially arise. This one made me giggle. This was her own term. She'd sometimes leave or often left the house with or without permission. And that she called her excursions. And excursions were different than simply visiting a friend or taking a walk. Excursions were definitely for the intent to access and steal food from different locations. When she got angry and things got stressful, she called those meltdowns. Now, the thing that she coveted the most and where her items went that she'd stolen was called her stash. Um, her stash, she was able to admit, was quite comforting for her. She enjoyed having it. It didn't matter what was in it. She wouldn't eat all the items she had in her stash, but she enjoyed the comfort of having a stash. So that led us to create a stash that she had in the house that parents were able to have some control over. It took a lot of time for parents to buy in to some of these ideas, but the argument was that she was accessing it no matter what. So to have some control over her stash was better than having no control over it, in order, again, to keep her safe. That was a big concept that we began to introduce for her as well, was these are not controls that are just put upon you. These are things that need to be implemented in order to increase your safety. She really appreciated that idea because it took some pressure off of her. And when she felt that people were motivated to keep her safe, a lot of the resistance diminished. So punitive strategies in response to food seeking and lying really, in my experiences, has created more proficient lying. So instead of learning how to do something different, they were getting better at lying, at hiding, she had things tucked in places I could have never expected things to be found, but they were there. And so she just got better at it. I was able to help mom and dad. There's a bit more buy-in from mom. Dad had a really hard time with this. To stop with the blame and the guilt, to stop reminding her that she's at risk, that she's going to gain weight, that she's going to get fat, that she's going to be sick. It did nothing to change the behavior. And if the behavior is not changing with pride or ways that you've always been dealing with it, that's your first indication that it's not working. So instead, we wanted to teach her how to communicate to us. If food or money was found hidden in her home, because room checks and house checks, environmental checks were part of her home life, whether it was in a really systematic way or if it was random. I know in group homes, room checks are done. Individuals I support in group homes, pocket checks are done. So when items were found, they were taken into a common area, such as the kitchen, and just left there and she was able to see her items were found. We know you have them. Now we're just going to move them over here and you can come see me when you want to access one or two of those items. So there was some negotiation on if there's 15 chocolate bars, we're going to negotiate that you're allowed one per week, or whatever it was that made sense for that family at that time. Keeping in mind that she had full access to 15 chocolate bars to begin with, so allowing her one in a controlled manner wasn't going to put her life in danger as much as complete and unmonitored access to food she had taken. Acting bored is another word for acting neutral. She'd do anything to get a rise out of me, and keeping really neutral over time allowed her to trust that, especially neutral to food access or food stealing or inappropriate access to things such as money, didn't get a big rise out of me. The opposite was what did get a big rise out of me and her parents were things she did really, really well. A lot of reinforcement for appropriate skills that she was demonstrating, and a lot less attention and increase or big reactions to steals or inappropriate food access. you can let them know that, or what we were able to do was letting her know that she can tell us where the food and the money came from, and we weren't going to shut that down right away. Um, I've always believed, the devil I know is 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 safer. So knowing where she was accessing things without really closing that up to her right away was pretty important. So be creative and remove the stigma. I implemented techniques such as a Dropbox for families and I think this is done naturally in a lot of homes, the place where you put your keys or your wallet or your anything in your hands when you first come in. It can it can be modeled and reinforced and empty your pockets here. This is what we do when we come home. In the group with the individuals in the group home I support, they have a bin when they come in, and anything in their pockets is put in the bin. It's they know ahead of time that if money or food is found in their pockets, that'll be taken and put somewhere safe for them. It's not, they're never going to see it again, but it's safe. It's locked in with petty cash, or it's put away. It's not immediately just you're never going to see it again. Although in the group home I work with, access to money, still their money, but we're going to hold it for you. In that way, anxiety decreased a lot. So the money's safe, the food's safe, everything's put away. Good. I don't have access to it. That was fine. And amazingly, they were able to they handled that as long as they knew it was not gone forever and they knew where it was. So telling the truth is a complex set of skills, usually developed by age 6 or 7, if that. They have to demonstrate an ability to hear and understand the question and realize that the question is important. So social awareness is required, and they have to be able to discern the consequences of their actions. And we know that a lot of individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome don't connect the consequences to their actions, especially with food access. Is the individual able to mentally withdraw from the present and return to the past and recall the event? These things we suspect that they just happen automatic, but we know with cognitive profile, the people we live with or support, that memory's not real strong. It might be easier to just say what appears a lie might just really be poor recall. Return to the present and connect to the person asking the question. Decision to tell the truth is made and answering the question. Knowing that it'll affect the listener, knowing that you might get a negative response. So identifying all these steps led to practice sessions that I was able to do with this young lady. So taking a skills training approach, again, thinking of lying as, or truth telling as a skill that needs to be developed. Okay, so helping the individual really get through step 2 and step 4. How did we do this? It felt a little bit fake. It felt a little bit weird, but over time, it just became something natural that we were able to do. Before, I was able to educate her. The PWS brain, as she would like to call it, we were able to have a discussion on saying, this is just the way your brain's wired. This does not make you a bad person. It's just the way that you're made, and that's okay. We got a commitment that we were going to practice so many times a week, and then that commitment again was transferred over to parents. We practiced truth identification and reporting exercises. I'll get to that in a sec. And memory recall proficiency exercises. So this is how we did that. So we'd actually sit down and have these questions prepared ahead of time, a really neutral question. It could be anything that makes sense to your individual. Did you clean the kitchen yesterday? Did you take the bus yesterday? Did you go to school yesterday? So the first cue would be take a second and go back to yesterday. Think about yesterday. See if you can remember it or if you don't. If you do remember, let me know by nodding your head, and she would. Now, when we first began this, a lot of giggling, a lot of avoiding, a lot of laughing, but over time it became a lot more natural. So she'd let me know, okay, I remember yesterday. Now that she did remember, do you have an answer to the question? Does it match the answer, the question I've asked you? She'd indicate yes or no. Then I'd say, now, do you want to tell me the truth or not? Again, a very, very neutral question. There was no risk, but we practiced these steps. So when asking a more heavy question or emotional question, these are the steps we'd use. So think about it, slow it down, give it time. Do you have an answer? Do you want to tell me yes or no? And if the answer was no, that was fine too. Over time, as she learned that she wasn't going to get a huge negative reaction, that her food sources weren't going to all of a sudden disappear, that she wasn't going to be punished, she became much more comfortable with this process. So again, the goal was to slow down every step. The problem is that we can't always confirm that a person is telling the truth, especially if they're out in the community or supervision is decreased. But we were able to practice these steps. Found items and self-report was considered measures of improvement. Also, I was able to identify what were her avoidance responses. So prior to implementing anything, what were her avoidance responses? And there was many: red face, gaze aversion, giggling, leaving. I know though, when I saw those behaviors, I knew she was quite uncomfortable with the questions being asked. As I went through the questions and asked her, I began to notice that her avoidance responses began to decrease, and her truth telling based on found items and self-report was increasing. So less items found, she was reporting less stealing. So her avoidance responses went down, her truth telling went up. It was quite remarkable. So to wrap it all up, I feel like I've just sped through that. I'm not sure what I'm doing for time, but in essence, I think it's more important to understand lying and stealing as a response to heightened anxiety. When her structure was off, when her routines were off, and her anxiety was up, there was a lot more reported stealing. There was a lot more anxiety, a lot more excursions. So managing anxiety came before, or helping her to manage her anxiety came before the truth-telling process as well. So helping her with deep breathing, helping her cope with her stress. For her, downtime was a huge trigger. So in addition to these steps that I've shared with you, we were able to plug in the holes in her daily structure where she needed more things to do and less time to be out on excursions. Food seeking and food access and pleasure from food is part of her genetic makeup. Their individuals with PWS is part of their genetic makeup, and it does not reflect on the integrity of their personality. I think if we can start educating, teaching more in a systematic way, and removing the blame and the guilt, we might see that we learn a lot more about where somebody's accessing food and what kind of dangerous behaviors they may be engaging in. So if we can think of it as a skill deficit and replace it with a more appropriate behavior through training, I think that will help keep the individual a lot safer. The information I got, or some of the techniques, came from this gentleman. It's quite old information, but I was really struggling to find anything on helping people with PWS stop stealing food. So I kind of pulled from here.